Last year I was lucky enough to be here, and I talked about neurogenesis, the building of brand new brain. That in the right circumstances, including movement, which you've all done, so hopefully you're building brand new brain right now, and getting together with people that you trust and know and like, so social interaction, and also new novel things that you do, you can build new brain. You can also rewire. So what's that got to do with leadership? Can leaders change your mind? Yes, they can. So hopefully some of you have been in a situation where you've been in either a team or an organisation where you've flourished. You know, you've felt like either you came up with really good ideas, or you wrote really good music, or you just got on together, you clicked, that kind of zone thing that happens. And that's because of those sorts of chemicals that start to whiz around, which we'll talk about, in a situation like that. And leaders can be key in creating an environment where that happens. And more than that, the direct interaction has huge effects. So hopefully you've had that, instead of having a situation like this. So very much, you can even see it in the kind of shrinking down. So that person's not exactly feeling like they're going to be able to do anything. Maybe some of you have been or are in organisations where that's how you feel, or that's the type of leadership. Compared to something like this, where obviously, if we take, say, the person on your right, being the leader, or, not to be sexist, having a female, there's huge differences, and a lot of them are around that kind of interconnectivity, the connection that they've got, the clear capacity for also liking each other. And those sorts of things feel soft, but they're not. They're really critical when we start to look at what happens in the brain and how we can start to build situations where we can come up with new sorts of ideas and pattern break into brand new, novel, sort of creative things, as well as just being happier in an environment. So a couple of things that I'll take you through. One is to do with face-to-face interaction. I'm doing a project at the moment with the medical school. I get to do all sorts of really interesting things. And this one is on the neurophysiology of touch and eye gaze in healing. And we do some amazing things when we lock eyes. We talked last year about that capacity, but one of the things I was talking about this morning was if, say, I take you and I'm looking at you and say you're my nurse. So we talked about robot nurses this morning. If you're my nurse and I trust you and I like you and I'm starting to feel anxious about something that I've had done, then the fact that I'm looking at you and our eyes meet, we get retinal lock, it's called, where one of your retina will lock onto one of mine until we sync the right hemispheres of our brains. Once that happens, the sympathetic nervous system changes the way it goes, and the amygdala alters, and I calm. So it's one of the reasons why if you stare, it's not stare, but if you're looking fondly at someone, one of your children or someone else, when they're upset, you can calm people. And you can also feel calmer when you have that situation where someone's actually looking at you. And whether you're in a care situation, or whether you're in an aged situation, or also whether you're at work, it has huge effects. So face-to-face activation is quite important, very important, especially if you're coming up with new ideas. So neural coupling does all sorts of things. Even storytelling allows you to do that in your brain. So when you're looking at each other, lots and lots is going on. If you meet each other for the first time, then a couple of neurons fire straight away. So one of them is the mirror neuron, and we've heard about that. It went into favour, out of favour. It's back in again now because there's some sort of new research. But the thing I want to say about mirror neurons is there is a subset of mirror neurons that only fires with smiles and laughter. It's dedicated to them. And for your brain to have something dedicated, it's very critical. So we're hardwired to connect. And if that's happening, then what you get is you get team bonding, which increases. And if you've got a manager, a leader, who connects with that, then those levels of firing multiply by about 3 times. So you have a contagion effect if you are a leader who is connecting positively like that. The next thing that fires is the spindle neuron. So it's the one on the left. On the right. So it's kind of long, it's called spindle. It sits from the front of your brain right across to the back, and it wires up empathy and emotion with reason and with task. So what they do is they build together the emotion, the belief and judgment. It's often called the trust neuron. And what you get then is putting them together, you have much more of a comfort in an interaction with someone. The third thing, which you were all doing just after lunch, is oscillating. So your brain oscillates all the time. You've always got your neurons sort of moving around a little bit. When you looked at those first pictures, if you noticed the people that were working well together, they were kind of, whether they were leaning in together or they were looking at each other. If anyone's ever done that experiment of me talking to you and you having to try and ignore me, you know, and so I can't really talk very easily in that situation because I feel very cut off. We show, just like in the last thing now of the ball, clapping and looking at each other, we show all of these cues to people that are either positive or not so positive, negative, I don't care, I don't want to listen to you. So that kind of oscillation is really critical. And if you talk about moving, you've just heard about all the chemicals that go into your bloodstream. If people walk and try and decide on problems, then you come up with quite different problems because you have something called BDNF, which is it's a chemical that allows you to build new neurons. And with oxygen, glucose, and BDNF, you can come back with an actual physical script built in your brain that you didn't have beforehand. So how you oscillate is really important. And when you do it positively with each other, you set up something called dynamic resonance. And that makes you feel very, very nice, that you get dopamine. It's why you rock a baby, dance, do all those sorts of nice things. It's really a positive thing to do with other people. So that's what's going on. So why talk about leaders? I spent about 30 years before going into university to do a thesis on why is it that there are certain leaders that are really good at leading, that impassion, that you would kind of walk through hell for. What is it about them? And why do they build adaptive companies? And out of the many things we could talk about, there was two things that were really critical. So the first thing was each of these people had a very, very passionate, clear idea of what they were there to do. And everybody knew it. So it wasn't all these changed goals, very clear. And the second thing was a strongly held sense of values. How will we treat each other? So if you think about that, you've got where are we going and how are we going to treat each other? And we're going to keep each other safe when we're going there. So if that's the what, then the how, being creative, you can get quite comfortable and kind of creative in there. And the third thing that was pretty obvious, there's a few, but they all tended to be pragmatic optimists. So they weren't saying that something was easy, but what they were saying was, we can do it, you can do it. Because very often, having things like measurement systems in organisations, that tends to, you get what you measure, but it tends to drive you down to where the measurement is. Whereas if you optimistically say, you know, if I have you as a group, we're going to do a fantastic job, you will tend, I expect you to do your best, you tend to do it. And the values keeps you to it as well. Because if you don't do anything, then it's my job to kind of gently let you know that you're not living up to those. So it's not that you're just really nice and fluffy, but you do really believe in the capacity of people to give their best, because human beings do. Once they think you believe it, they do. And if I can sufficiently impassion you, say if I'm your leader now or manager now, about a new thing we might need to do or a change in a process or a change in the market, then if you get excited and you trust me, then your parasympathetic nervous system will start to fire. Your immune system will start to fire, and those chemicals will start going into your brain, and you'll start to build a new picture of what we might do. And if I was able to scan every one of you, and we can do that now, we can do multiple scanning, then what we would see is everybody would be building a physical piece of schemata, a physical script, a new map in your head. So as leaders, think about how powerful that is. Think about all those little rules and regulations you don't need when everyone's actually going in the same direction. It's a really powerful thing, neurogenesis. So you get these sort of shared neural nets, they're called by some people. And if they're sufficiently in the organisation, then what you start to see is people's brains start to move into the same sort of capacity as a leader. One of the fascinating pieces of research that I'm going to be doing in Quebec is following on from some research in the last few years in, I think, ASADA and in the US on passionate, transformative managers' brains. When we scan those brains, the actual brains look different. So if someone is one of those charismatic leaders and they start to talk about their organisation, different parts of their brains light up than if I put a quite sort of linear or hierarchical leader in that scanning system. They look physically different. And can that change? Well, that's a different discussion entirely, but yes, mostly they can. So what is it that they understand? Why are they so successful in allowing people to flourish and getting the best out of people? One of the first things they understand is the importance of trust. So trust allows us to take those risks. You certainly have to trust people holding you in a situation like that. I was lucky enough to spend some time with Cirque du Soleil this year. And one of the things that I noticed really, really clearly was the extremely high level of trust. Yes, of course, they have to have that because of safety, but it went way beyond there. They were an extremely familial, very supportive environment where everybody really did want to assist other people to do the best possible thing they could. So it was an incredibly interesting situation to be in. There was even trust in what I was doing. The idea that we were looking at was, if Cirque is a heart, and everyone from the performers to the ushers are arteries, how do we make the heart beat stronger? How's that for a brief? It's a pretty kind of interesting organisation. So some of the things that trust does is it lowers the resistance to new ideas because you have that capacity of feeling like it's not as risky as it would be. You absorb more information because if you think about that kind of chemical soup, one of the things that does is speeds up your capacity to take in information and to lay it down and to utilise it. You are more nimble, therefore, because you've got more of those chemicals running around in your brain. And you can also be more highly creative because you can go outside the square much more easily in a situation like that. And lastly, you get something called perceived fairness. Fairness is a really interesting thing in an organisation. If a leader is considered fair, it has an effect on the next level down. So with your peers, if you have what you consider as a fair organisation, you interact and collaborate an awful lot more at those levels further down. If you have an unfair leader that you consider maybe plays favourites, for whatever reason they are unjust, that stops. The levels below are minimally collaborative, I guess you'd say. It really makes a big difference. It's quite a fast contagion effect, and it's very strong. And you're nodding away. I'm going to ask you. If sufficiently you are discomforted by the people or person that leads you or manages you, then you can get really uncomfortable and anxious. And then what you get is cortisol. And cortisol acts like a blanket over any kind of new thought. It just stops it dead. And if it's bad enough, it stops you even being able to get hold of the information you've already got in your brain. So it's the reason why scared people do dumb things. Dumb people do scary things. Yeah. Maybe dumb people do dumb things too. And why dumb people don't know they're dumb. Oh, there's all sorts of things that you can talk about there. Okay, so... Okay, the next thing is connectivity. So good leaders understand how important it is to connect. And for those of you in a workshop this morning with myself and Jordan, who you'll hear later, we do a lot of work around connecting with I guess, different forms of technology, with flat screens, with visual ideation, with virtual teams, all that sort of stuff. And there's some fascinating information around when you need to be interconnected with someone else, when you need to be face-to-face with another human being. So one of the things that you need to think about is, if we just talked about those neurons and how you create a piece of me and I create a piece of you the first time we meet, once you've established a relationship with someone, then it's almost like you're carrying around a little bit of them, in your head. So then when you talk to them on the phone, immediately you'll think, oh, it's that person. And you can start that form of connection. If you haven't done that, it doesn't happen. So you really have to think about what you need to do with people and how you need to interconnect with them. So yes, email's terrific, but email will never be the same as a phone, because at least it's two-way. And the phone will never be the same as your Facebook and your different screens of having a look. But that's still a flat screen. And so if you need to actually interact, if there's any kind of anxiety, if there's a change process, if there's those sorts of things, it's face-to-face. Because of the reasons we just talked about, things like the retinal lock, those sorts of things make a difference. So it doesn't mean that you can't interact over non-face-to-face. It means you've really got to think about what it is that you need to achieve. Another thing that they're very good at is understanding that what people call the soft stuff really is hard. So some words that people use all the time that I hear, I'll tell you what happens in the brain with those things. So the first one is respect, and there's a lot of stuff around respect. What actually happens when you listen to someone or you're listened to is the brain then picks out what you say and I say that match. So if I feel respected by you and we have a conversation, I'll pick up all the parts of your conversation that mean we have something in common. You know, you do it with, say, a friend of a friend. You're going to like them, so you do that. Oh, yes, I went there. Oh, yeah, I knew that. And it's what we do automatically. If you talk at people, what the brain then does is it picks out all of the things that you say that prove that we don't connect or that you're wrong. So I start trying to find evidence in what you say of why you're not right and I'm right, so I won't listen to you. So there's all sorts of filters that start to occur in your brain if you are not feeling respected when someone talks to you. Another thing is delegation. We know delegation is about resources and tasking properly, allowing people to act, because we only learn when we put something into practice. And unfortunately, most of the time, it's only at top levels in organisations that you get to act. But we actually learn by doing. The other thing delegation does is it brings out the complex thinkers. So when people think outside the square, you don't find out who they are until you give them complex problems to solve. Sounds pretty simple, but organisations don't do it very much. And it allows people to look for what we call disconfirming information as well. Is that right? Have we got everything? It stops that groupthink thing happening. Another thing is boundaries. We need boundaries. I go into organisations that say, we've got innovation roundtables. Terrific. What are you finding? And after about 2 minutes, it's, well, actually, we tend to talk about where to put bins and how many things people win in competitions. It's impossible. If I say to all of you, be creative for the next 30 seconds, it's really difficult. But if I task you with something specific and say, for the next 2 minutes, think about, X, you'll start to be able to think about it straight away. So we need boundaries around scope, because then we can, within it, we can really play, we can do things. Empowerment, yes. So I hear a lot about that, knowledge, experience, If you feel empowered, there's a couple of things that you'll be feeling. You'll be feeling valued. You'll also be feeling like you can use your own judgment. So often empowerment doesn't let you do that, or what they call empowerment doesn't let you do it. You'll also be feeling like there's movement. It's actually a way forward. So it's quite different than just saying you're allowed to have a voice. That's not the same thing at all, because it doesn't allow you to get that really, really happy, positive environment with a capacity that's going to increase what you're thinking about. We talked about values. Shared values does a number of things. So it elicits high trust. It's all those things to do with interconnecting. But you get a stronger collective identity, and therefore people contribute more. They rise to the occasion. And you engage empathy. I just saw your empathy being engaged at the end of the last set. So what happens in empathy? Why is it important? Emotion is critical to good strategic decisions. It's not that you get emotion off the table, you put emotion on the table. Because what happens with your brain is when you have to think about something complex, you have unknown unknowns. And what the brain then does is say, okay, I haven't got all the information I need to go and find it. And the first thing it will do is look into different parts of your knowledge, your experience, your chunked, understanding of the world. So technically, it means that it goes into motor neuron system, which goes into a discernment mode, which uses a different filter system to kind of sieve through all the information you've got. And it's based very much on values. And it allows you to start building novel connections, different connections that you didn't have before. And because it assigns values, one of the other things it does is it starts to push you out into consequentialism, it's called. So it really makes you look long term. Instead of just right now, what do I want to do? It's completely different to that. So strategic decisions are much better with empathy, with emotion. So what you end up with is this wonderful chemical cocktail. And you've got all of these things, going on, and this method of being able to change how you think. So cognitively, a good leader ends up being able to increase the size of brains, how they're wired, how they can think outside the square, so ideation's better, increasing the speed, people can think more nimbly, and they change that lens, that problem-solving lens, which means that because we all are in ambiguous situations, we never know what's going to come, people are comfortable enough to step into that. The one other thing I'll say, we do make the whole organisation, if we could fire it all up, it would be incredible. But the one other thing is, does it change the leaders while they're doing that? Yes. We know it's nice to be nice, but the reason why is because when you're a leader that leads in that kind of way, you're increasing your own metacognitive capability a lot. So the social capacity for you to pick up, use your radar, read people, know how to put them together, know when to leave them alone, know when to tend and trust, and then know when to step in. That kind of wisdom really grows in an environment like that. The emotional stuff is about your own self-awareness. If anyone's had a fairly linear leader who is very opinionated, one thing they're not is self-aware. So it's very difficult because if they don't know that they don't know it, then how do you let them know? It becomes quite hard in that situation. And the last thing is people actually get better at the whole task of running the situation that they're running and of running a whole company because it does flourish. Thank you.